who was Allah before Islam? A lot of people tend to imagine the emergence of Allah as a deity or the object of worship to be the product of the Prophet's ministry and the Islamic project. Because, there are other, super beings in the Safavidic pantheon. We can call them gods if you like. But in the Quranic context, the mushrikeen are calling them shuraka or shufa'a, right? The intercessors or what have you. They're still super beings. This il, meaning God, disappeared. And the il is substituted with Allah. So you have names like Wahab Il. Arabic name means il has given. And then later you get names like Wahab Allah. Allah has given. So and we see that Allah is the creator deity, splitting deity, all this, which is compatible with ancient deeds. So what's the relation? But Yisma'il, this is what you'll get in many inscriptions, is a common Arabian name stretching from Yemen to Syria and pre-Islamic times. Yisma'il is everywhere. This is a very common, okay, it's widespread. It's common enough. It's quite common and widespread. In contexts where we cannot argue for the impact of, the Hebrew Bible or scriptural monotheists.
Peace, everyone. And we're back with the Real Talk podcast, where we bring academic insights on Islam to curious minds. I'm your host, Tehran, and as always, I'm joined by my brilliant co-host, Roxana. This episode is going to be a really interesting one, like all of our episodes, in my opinion. But this one feels especially unique. It's a topic I haven't heard discussed much, and honestly, it wasn't something I'd given much thought into until reading Professor Al-Jalad's thought-provoking article, Ancient Allah and Epigraphic Reconstruction. First off, thank you, Professor Al-Jalad, for joining us once again on this platform and trusting us to help share your work.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Last time you were on our podcast, that episode became one of our most listened to, and for good reason. You bring a level of clarity and excitement to a part of history that, to my surprise, still, I say that because when I first found out about epigraphy and inscriptions, I couldn't imagine other people would be as interested in it as I was. I was just like surface level, really getting into the field from a layman's perspective. But yeah, so many people are genuinely interested in and excited to learn about this material. And now this new piece, Ancient Allah and Epigraphic Reconstruction, or what we could casually call Who Was Allah Before Islam, is such a rich and complex topic. After reading your article, for a lot of people, even just the idea of tracing the origins of the name of Allah outside of the Quran and even the Islamic tradition might sound a bit controversial, maybe even provocative. But at the same time, it's really fascinating. So let's start right there. What first drew you to this particular question?
Well, I wasn't necessarily drawn to the question uh, because of the, say, controversy or anything of that sort. Uh, I would say that the material we discover in the field draws us towards answering certain questions. The way you put it, indeed, it is quite provocative and perhaps even thought-provoking. Um, who was Allah before Islam? A lot of people tend to imagine the emergence of Allah as a deity or the object of worship to be the product of the Prophet's ministry and the Islamic project. But of course, reading the Quran itself, there was even with the opponents in the Prophet's opponents in the Quran never objected to the worship of Allah, right? So there was acknowledged that they had that in common. Prophet and his opponents both acknowledged Allah as a supreme deity, and they both worshipped Allah. They just worshipped him in different ways. The Quranic mushrikeen, the opponents, worshipped him alongside other, let's say, gods. I don't like the term gods because it's ill-defined. I don't know exactly what a god is. So in this study that we'll discuss today, I decided to use the term super being, which comes actually, it's inspired by the character Q from Star Trek. If you know that reference, you get the idea. But what is a super being? It's just a well, something that could be human-like or a sentient being that has supernatural abilities, and there are degrees of that. And at any stage, those supernatural beings may be called gods by their worshippers. They may be called angels. They may be called anything else. But what we're talking about are beings that have abilities that are beyond human. Okay. The prophet's opponents venerated other super beings, and that was the point of contention. So we know from the very beginning, just reading the Quran, that Allah was worshipped by the pre-Islamic Arab, but we don't know exactly how. We don't have the traditional sources don't furnish us with anything in the way of Allah mythology before Islam, how they regarded him. There are a few verses, I think, and we'll get into that I think give us some clues within the Quran, but the texts are not very informative. Christian Robin wrote a fantastic article, I think it was in 2020, about Allah before Muhammad, where he gathered all the epigraphic sources that mention the name Allah um, as a divine name and tried to understand the role of this super being. So he got sources from Najran in the southern part of Arabia all the way up to Jordan. All of the texts that he investigated, not a single one provided us anything, it provided any insights into, let's say, Allah's mythology, who this character was for the pre-Islamic Arabs. We simply had invocations to him. For example, there's the Qariyat al-Faw inscription, which is very nice. It's a grave epitaph. It's undated. We can ballpark it to around 2,000 years ago. It comes from South Central Arabia in an ancient town called Qariyat al-Faw. The inscription is a burial inscription for a grave of a man called Rababil Bar Hawfi'am or bin Hawfi'am, and the his brother builds him this grave and puts the grave under the protection of three deities. It says wa'adahu, so he put it under the protection of Kahal, Allah, and Athar al-Shari. So I've got a deity called Kahal, very obscure. We don't know, or Kahil, we don't know what he does. Allah, and then another deity, Athar al-Shari, Athar, or the Venus of the East, the morning star. Okay. So Allah seems to be a well-defined deity, super being within a pantheon. It's mentioned beside two other deities. But we don't get any insights about who Allah was in such a context. You know, it doesn't say anything, just except that he was a god. And Hoban establishes that Allah was worshipped widely across Arabia, but we had little more to go on. I wouldn't have written this article if it weren't for a chance discovery that I made in 2024. That is a year ago. And this is interesting because it's almost exactly a year ago. We were surveying in northeastern Jordan in Safavidic country. Yeah.
So Priscilla, could you just give us a little context about when you use the word Safaitic, what it actually means, and how somebody who isn't very familiar with that tradition, how they can navigate that?
Yes, wonderful. So the discovery that we'll be discussing today is a Safavidic inscription that comes from an archaeological site in the Harra, in the Harra of Jordan and Syria. This is a basalt desert. Basalt is volcanic rock that comes from an ancient volcanic eruption. It's located in the northeastern part of Jordan, east of Hauran, and into Syria, and stretches all the way down into Saudi Arabia. This is an area that I'm very busy surveying and working in. Surveying means basically exploring to find not only inscriptions, but also document archaeological sites. And it's the documentation of archaeological sites, in fact, that allows us or better positions us to understand these inscriptions. So this area I've been busy in now for almost 10 years, 10 years exploring. And most of the region remains unexplored. Okay, so we're at the beginning of a very interesting, let's say, scientific field. The basalt rock is beautiful support for writing inscriptions. It's black, and when you carve on it new, it becomes bright white. So it's almost like a chalkboard. Then over time, it weathers, the color changes, but it's still very nice and sturdy. The region is filled with inscriptions from many different cultures. Early Islamic inscriptions, Greek, Nabatean, Aramaic. Those are rare, but Palmyrene also pretty rare, Aramaic. But the biggest, let's say, inscriptional product of the region is Safavidic. Okay, and Safavidic is a term, it's a conventional term modern scholars have given to an indigenous Arabian pre-Arabic script alphabet used by the nomads who lived in this area some 2,000 years ago, give or take 3, 4 centuries. Okay, they lived here and they developed a sophisticated writing tradition that intersects with their rituals and life. Okay, so these texts tell us a lot about the different cultural and ritual practices they had, parts about their lives, their religion. This particular discovery is remarkable because it contains an unformulaic and new invocation and religious text. We can almost call it a liturgical text directed towards Allah in the pre-Islamic period, some at least 600 years before the Quran. And I'll show you here, if I could share my screen, which I'll do. One moment, let me go here. Yes, excellent. All right, so you see this nice photograph. Excellent. Let me go back. I'm going forward now. Excellent. So we're surveying a place in Jordan. You can see it right here in the background. This is what they call a marab. Marab is a flat area where water can pool and vegetation will grow. To bring herdsmen, this will bring people to pasture their animals. And then at the top, you have this hill overlooking it, and you see this sort of rectangular structure. It's a remarkable structure. Not seen very many things like this in the Harra before. There are many kinds of stone arrangements, but this one is unique because when you get close to it, you see all of the stones of the southern wall are inscribed. You see, so you will find many of these sort of stone structures around, but having inscribed stone structures is incredibly unique. Okay, not frequent at all. And this stone structure, as we go forward and look at it, you can see here we have a number of inscriptions. All of these rocks here are inscribed. The stone structure is one text which is signed. It tells you what this entire installation was constructed for, who it was constructed for. It was constructed for a man called Akram. He deceased. He died, and this was a memorial installation, and it was called a fidya. Fidya comes from the Arabic root fawaya, which means rest. It gives rise to the expression in the Quran mathwa, right, which is your final abode. Very. So this structure was constructed for this man called Aqrab, and all of these inscriptions here, all of these stones are inscribed, sort of memorializing him. We photographed it, we documented it in the field, and of course we have to move on. We can't spend the entire time looking at the structure and reading the inscriptions on site, although perhaps we should have. But we documented it thoroughly, but we left the reading for later. On the flight back after field work, I usually use the 12 hours to get back to the United States, looking through everything that we discussed. And this stone here in the corner, this little stone, was different from all the rest. So all of these stones here have big inscriptions saying we built this Ziyat for a man called Atrab who died and so forth, and they were grieving for him. This text was different. This text, so this is the text here that says Ziyat. I'll bring us to that text right now. This is what the text looks like right here. You can see the handwriting is very different. The character shapes are very different. It stands apart from the other inscriptions, which are they look more like this. You see these big, what we call the variant three of the Safed script. This one here is very different. In fact, it was written by a man who wasn't part of the burial um, party. He did not construct this installation. Rather, he comes here, sees the installation, reads the inscriptions, and we have this genre in Safed where people will reflect on death or on the loss of loved ones upon encountering graves and funerary installations. And this is exactly what this man does. And as I tried to read it on the airplane, I realized that it wasn't a text that I could solve on the airplane ride. In fact, it was filled with words that I had never seen before, expressions that I had never seen before. But right here in the middle, this is where I realized the text was actually quite special and what led me to kind of open up the file on the pre-Islamic Allah. Right here, the prayer says, this is the prayer section, begins the prayer. It says, Allah. So, oh Allah, like Ya Allah. Allah, Nur. Nur meaning light. So, oh Allah, let there be light, shine light, grant light. There's no verb, so it's an existential clause. Let there be X, but you can supply verbs if you like. Grant light. But in any case, it's a request from Allah to grant Nur. And anyone who knows the Quran automatically sees the significance of the collocation of these two words, Allah and Nur. And what makes it stand out more, what makes this text stand out more is that we have hundreds upon hundreds of Safidic prayers, okay? Hundreds upon hundreds. They always ask for practical, tangible things. Booty, security from enemies, blood money, livestock, things you can actually use
This
in this life.
worldly item.
Yes, precisely. Things that are useful. Rain, lots of prayers for rain. But light, no one has ever prayed for light because light, nur, you have light every day. There's obviously not talking about the kind of light that the sun or the moon bring. This is something, to speak colloquially, this is something spiritual. And and for me, that was it. That triggered it. I said, this here is a tremendously important text. There's something special about this text. And as you continue read, basically that was his very important part here is 100% crystal clear. Everything else in the text is not. But that was the opening. That was the key. And then for the next year, on and off, I thought about it. I started working on it. But that was that moment where I realized we had indeed come upon a very special discovery.
Because that text right there speaks to Safayetic authors kind of contemplating about an afterlife. Which we know from the many Safayetic inscriptions, it seems to be something that they didn't focus too much on. I mean, when I was reading the text, I know this, when you go over this in your article, it's in the middle part of the article, which is the technical, and I had to reread it a few times, but
Yeah.
I really gained a bit of appreciation, maybe a bit sympathetic to what he was feeling in terms of like when you die, go into the next world, is it going to be darkness, this idea of just pitch black, just contemplating, is there an afterlife? And as you contrast what we understand darkness to be in Near Eastern cosmology as opposed to light, it's almost like he's asking for life after death.
So yes, so again, all of these terms. So you saw my hesitation to use the term God because it's not precisely defined.
Right.
We must also there is something after death, but is it life? You see, so when we say afterlife, we start to imagine sort of the continuation of our ego following the demise of our physical body. That our person, ourselves, our ego continues after our body's destruction somewhere in the world. And so it's a kind of life. I'm not sure. I really don't know what the authors of these Safvidic inscriptions thought happened after they died.
Mm.
Whether the ego continued in the sense that we think about it or not, that's all very unclear. Like I said, it's in my little booklet, it's let's say typologically white. It would be strange if they had no concept of an afterlife. Right? Almost all human cultures have this idea that there's something after you die. But that thing can vary quite drastically. What I would say, and we can kind of connect this to the discourse of the Mushrikeen and the Quran, it is incredibly unlikely that they believed in any kind of resurrection,
Mm.
especially a bodily resurrection, that they believed in any kind of judgment or any of those things are, let's say, unlikely once we look at the situation. But this is the first, you're right, this is the first text that seems to show concern for something happening after you die in a serious way. Now, there are hints, of course, elsewhere in the corpus that the grave is something to be kept preserved, something special. One of the commonest curses is to throw someone out of the grave, so kind of desecrate the grave.
Even
But
worse by your own relative, as I
yes,
in one
yes,
of the inscriptions
yes,
you have in the
precisely.
article.
Precisely, yeah. So being betrayed by someone you trust, right? Um, in any case, so this was the real clue, but the rest of the text was just a mess. It's not a mess. It's the reason why the text is so interesting is because it's not strictly formulaic. And when these ancient inscriptions are not formulaic, um, their interpretation becomes very difficult. The only reason we can understand ancient texts, think about it when you read a text like the Quran or ancient Arabic poetry. One of the main reasons you can understand this text, for better or worse, sometimes the understanding is not precise or is incorrect, is because you have a commentary tradition. It's because you have a long tradition of people who've been reading it closely and telling you what it means. And of course, you can dispute some of the details, but it's like training wheels still, right? And you have something that's holding you up. When you come to a dead language like Zambia, there is no commentary tradition.
Mm.
There is nobody is there telling you what any of these texts. Everything has to be reconstructed, and so it becomes and that's fine when it has to do with subjects that we can understand very clearly, like he pastured sheep. I mean, that's not very difficult. We migrated with the camels. Okay, we can be clear. But when you start to get into metaphorical language, poetic language, when you start dealing with aspects of spiritual, then it becomes very difficult.
Yes, yes.
So yeah, and so the text is Allah Nur, so God, so Allah, let there be light, absolutely clear in the sense that it doesn't require much. We don't miss much by not having a commentary tradition. Everything surrounding that required intensive philological and comparative linguistic treatment and archaeological and the sensitivity towards the archaeological context to kind of bring out the meaning. But it's everything that's surrounding it that actually gives us the insight um into the question that you asked about what's going on with the afterlife. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, you show an extreme amount of caution in your article when you're sort of navigating all of these different possible interpretations of these inscriptions and the linguistic and sort of conceptual ideas that are attached to those. What is your approach when you're trying to navigate between possible different interpretations and which one holds the most weight and which one makes the most sense in the context?
So let's look at what the rest of the text says. All right. So I'm going to move us to the text. This is the tracing of it. So I'll move us a little bit forward. So we have here Allah Nur, or God grant, or Allah, we should say here, not God, because this is Allah in a pagan context with many, many different meanings. So Allah grant light, let there be light. It's a mess, but then the last four letters also, let's say, cue us in to something very familiar and underscore the importance of this text. The last four letters are dhu, and dhu is the relative pronoun meaning the one who, and khalaqa. That is the Arabic word khalaqat, create, the one who has created. So it's that middle section now we have Allah granting light. And at the very end of the inscription, we have an epithet calling him the creator. All of a sudden, this text looked extremely compatible with later Islamic ideas of Allah, which are not specifically Islamic ideas of Allah, because we can see that even from the Quran, that the Prophet's opponents also shared those ideas about Allah. When they are asked who created man khalaqa as-samawati wal ard, who created the heavens and the earth, the opponents, the mushrikeen, the in the way it's often translated, and it's a poor translation, but we'll deal with it later. The idolaters, they translate, they say Allah. They respond affirmatively, Allah created the heavens and the earth. So the idolaters, the mushrikeen, the opponents of Muhammad, they're the basic theological proposition that there is a creator deity, and that creator deity is called Allah, is shared by both groups. And what we see is that this text falls into that category as well, where the Safiatic authors, if you would have asked them perhaps who created the heavens and the earth, they would have responded in the same way, saying Allah. So this is tremendously interesting. So now we have a bunch of everything else in the text is just really messy. How do we get to it? How do we understand it? So, for example, this is the guy's name. It begins with his name, Uwais bin Adam bin Sa'd. Okay, fine, that's his name. And then it moves to a narrative. Wa ta'ammara. Wa ta'ammara. Now, this verb, ta'ammara, is a very tricky verb because it does not exist with any suitable meaning in classical Arabic. If we look at the classical Arabic dictionaries, it's useless. It means to become an emir in classical Arabic, which is not useful here, to become a commander. And then the next word is radaf, which means following, then nafs, which means soul, wadid, which means beloved, and then athirat, which is the participle, or atharat, or however we would vocalize it, meaning having fallen or died. So studying this very closely and trying to get to the meaning of ta'ammara, and I try to do this in quite some detail by looking at parallel phrases and other comparable contexts in the epigraphic record. Ta'ammara here in Safiatic probably means something like to fear, to worry about, to fear. It's a feeling of anxiety towards something that has not yet happened. Ta'ammara radif. Radif means to follow, but in Safiatic, there's in a funerary context, it means a procession of the dead. That is when you take the dead man to his grave. Okay? And nafs wadid means the soul of a beloved. This is attested before as a phrase. And athirat means fallen. So when we put this all together, actually, it produces a rather enigmatic phrase that only starts to make sense once we read the inscription in its archaeological context. And the inscription says, and he feared the procession of those beloved, of the souls of the beloved who have fallen. What it is a statement of the fear of the death of loved ones. Now, why is he saying this? Remember where he is. He's at a funerary site. He's at a mortuary installation. He sees death all around him. He has memorial inscriptions there. And so he is reacting to this. He is reacting to this scene of death. And this actually is a recurring genre, not only in the Safiatic inscriptions, but it's a genre in pre-Islamic poetry, where you go to the abandoned campsite and you weep and recall the beloved, and mourn and reflect on ideas of loss and separation. It's this contemplative, reflective genre of inscription. So he sees that these people have buried their loved one. He's reacting to that, saying, I fear the procession to the grave of those beloved to me who died. I fear that they will die. I fear death, basically. Indeed, even in the Quran, the believers are told to visit the graveyards, right? That you're supposed to visit the graveyards as a way of reflecting on, uh, the finite nature of life. So that's what we see happening here. And then after he says that, he says, Allah nur. So Allah, let there be light, right? Let there be light. And then he continues on. Wa ha ma ma gha ma ya bana ya ta ha. Okay. You can do all kinds of things with that. You can do all kinds of things with that. There's so many possibilities, and I go through them all. So we need a methodology when we don't have a commentary tradition, when we don't have 1,000 years of people studying these texts who are connected to that culture, who had some sense of what any of this meant. We need a methodology to say that, well, it's not just because you can read something to plausibly mean something grammatically that it's acceptable. What other conditions do we need to determine which interpretations are more likely to be correct? And
So
for
then,
there, yeah,
I mean, I was just going to say, well, that begs the question, what criteria or
yeah,
methodology you decide which interpretation holds
absolutely,
most
absolutely.
the most weight?
So I would say, and I try to give 6 criteria in the audit. One, we'll go over just a few of them they're all common sense. One, you shouldn't change the letters in the inscription to make it work. Okay, so you shouldn't alter what's there. The text is there. Yes, in extreme situations, people have spelling mistakes and things of that sort, but that weakens the argument if you have to start changing the letter. Two, these inscriptions are coherent compositions. What each section needs to fit with other sections in the text. You see what I mean? These are not just random disconnected statements. They need to form a coherent composition. They need to make sense in their archaeological environmental context. I was reading an inscription that was translated on Oceana that I was editing, where the person who had translated it translated as a prayer saying, "Oh, so and so deity, protect the well, protect the well." Okay, but there's no well anywhere around. This is what I mean. It needs to make sense in its context. You can't start having inscriptions that say protect the well when there's no well. And it's sort of meaningless just to say protect any random well. Okay. So the environment has to inform or our methods of interpretation. See what I mean? Um, they need to be grammatically compatible. They don't need to involve making up meanings of words. So there are all of these different criteria. And when you run through all of these criteria, what you end up with, I think, is probably the most reasonable understanding of this. Is this here, hama is the verb ahmi, protect. This is min, from, and rami. Rami means the covering or darkness. Okay? And then banayataha. This is bunyat, which means construction. And who is his, referring back to the author. Now, the idea, again, construction, a construction can be anything. What does construction mean in context? And when we look deeply in other examples of this word in the Safidic corpus, the epigraphy, we realize that the term bunyat refers to the mortuary complex, refers to the grave, the cairn, probably. We have examples where someone visits the dead man's cairn and he renews it, calling it a bunyat. Let's say maybe it was falling apart or he put more dirt on it, who knows? But he renews it. So what this would be, and protect. So remember, this guy Uwais comes to the site. He reflects on death as a phenomenon. He fears the procession to the grave of fallen loved. This is his reflection on death, having seen the burial of another man by his beloved. He asks Allah for light and to protect wahmi, and to protect from the darkness of his grave, to protect from the darkness of his funerary installation. Okay, now you could say this is what's very interesting. You could one of the interpretations that I have posed in the article is Ghami here means the covering, and bunyat can also mean something like a temple. So, and that he gave or he offered the covering of his temple. Okay, that's a plausible sentence, but it makes no sense in context. Where's the temple? There's no temple around. He's reflecting on death. He's asking God for light, and then all of a sudden he's talking about temples. So those are some of the things we need to be sensitive to. Yes, in isolation, those words can mean that. In context, it's meaningless. We're talking about death. We're talking about light and light opposition. We're talking about oppositions of light and darkness. Right? There's a balance to it. These are literary texts. So, and protect him from the darkness of his grave. This is fantastic. And then the final part is beautiful. وَوَهِبَنَّهُ or وَهَبَنَّهُ, we don't know the exact pronunciation, we don't have vowels. And grant him hati, grant him this or that. Translations of demonstratives are fluid. Hati is feminine, and nur in Arabic is feminine. So, and grant him that, that is the light. Tha khalaqa, O you, or O he who has created, or O you of creation. It's an epithet. O one of creation, grant him that light. As when we read it that way, we have a coherent composition that all of a sudden opens up so many new ways of thinking about ancestral Arabian and the role of the creator deity in that belief system. Huh? Allah here is a light-giving deity, very clearly. That light is meant to illuminate the dark. This is what the prayer is. He wants to be protected from the darkness of his grave, from death. That light is not sunlight, it's not moonlight, it's this supernatural divine light that is supposed to illuminate, the darkness of the grave.
Mm.
And he is asked again to grant that, and he's given the epithet as the deity of creation, right? The one who was created. So he is the creator. And we can go, yeah.
I was just going to say, since we're forced to think metaphorically about this, I'm curious on what we are to understand from this description of darkness, dark protection from darkness of the grave. It can't just if the light that we're speaking about isn't simply just like sunlight.
Yeah.
I imagine the darkness that the author of the inscription is mentioning isn't simply just without sunlight.
So in the ancient Near East, the afterlife was never a happy place. It wasn't, gardens and pavilions and all of these nice, happy things. The afterlife was a dark, wet, nasty place that the dead would just go and dwell in and eat dust. It was miserable for everyone, huh? It doesn't matter if you were good or bad. It's no good. The prayer for light is against that miserable state. In a way, it is a prayer against death itself. And you can see that, or you can hear echoes of this ancient idea of the afterlife, or what happens after death, the underworld, even in Islamic traditions, right? So in the article, I bring up a number of quite interesting dua prayers that are attributed to the Prophet. One that I think is really captures the same idea, right? Allahumma ja'al li nuran fi qabri. Oh Allah, put light or shine light, grant me light in my grave.
Mm.
Right? So it's a very similar idea that the grave is this dark, miserable place, and that the supernatural intervention comes from the shining light into it, right? In a way, somehow to, I would see it simply as a way of asking to prolong life or to make death more tolerable. I don't know, right? That part is not given to us from this inscription. All we know is from this inscription is that our author, after asking for light, wants protection from the darkness of the grave. Okay, so it's very close in its meaning to what you see here in Islamic period material. And
And
also one, yes, go ahead.
no, sorry about that. Maybe I should let you finish your thought.
No, no, I was saying, this opposition of light and darkness equaling death and light equaling life, and of course the creator deity is, you can find that theme throughout um, ancient Near Eastern mythology, and also you just read Surah Al-Falaq, right? That's it's a nice example of God being called the Lord of Dawn, right? From Al-Falaq, which is light, and he's against Ghasib and Idha Waqab, against darkness, against night when it falls, right? So it's a very this theme it's a reoccurring theme. It's very obvious, but it's reoccurring, and it's really interesting text as well. Yeah.
In terms of those themes, what can, if we're trying to sort of fit this into a sort of Near Eastern cosmology and theology that precedes Islam, what can it tell us about how Islam and the Quran built upon that theology, whether it's in relation to the afterlife or the theological role of Allah and
Yeah.
and how much of a departure it was from that context?
That's a wonderful question. I think that's um, the say the real historical impact of this text is, in fact, when you read this text, there is, from an Islamic perspective, nothing objection. Unlike all the other Safavid inscriptions that are falling upon all these other gods, if you just read it here, and that's, I think, very. Not only is there nothing necessarily objectionable here, but it is also compatible with other ancient Near Eastern texts, like the Hebrew Bible, right? I mean, this first line, Allah Nur, let there be light. I mean, this is Genesis, and this all speaks to a shared, let's say, yeah, a shared heritage. Shared, they're drawing on the same mythological tradition that is more ancient, right? These are different strands, the same storytelling tradition about um, the creation of the world and the role of the deities or the creator deity in it. One of the things hidden in this text that's also very interesting, that sheds more light on your question, is this verb khalaqa. The khalaqa is an to mean create is an Arabic isigloss, meaning the sense of to create with this verbal root khalaqa only occurred in Arabic. And all the other Semitic languages, and even in Arabic as well, it means to portion or divide, to split. Okay? To portion or divide, to split. It's only in Arabic that it means to create. So then we ask, how does the verb of creation, how does the verb of creation come from the verb of splitting? And if you know anything about ancient Near Eastern mythology, creation was not ex nihilo. There is eternal pre-existent matter. And the creator deity makes the world that we live in, makes our universe by separating that primordial matter. Usually it's the waters, right? But you separate it, you split it. In the Babylonian tradition, it's the splitting of Tiamat, the chaotic waters by Marduk. We have in the Hebrew Bible as well, the firmament, right? Creating the firmament, splitting it in that sense. And even in the Quran, I think you can see that the pagans themselves, the prophet's opponents, also believed in the idea of creation through the splitting of primordial matter, where, for example, you have in 2130, أولم يرى الذين كفروا أن السماوات والأرض كانتا رتقا. So don't those who disbelieve or deny regard that the heavens and earth were رتقا, they were joined, ففتقناهما, and then we split them. وجعلنا من الماء كل شيء حي أفلا يؤمن. And we have forged from water every living thing, all living things. So don't they believe? But this is the idea of the primordial waters being the source of creation, right? So these are the pagans, these are the mushrikeen who believe this, right? So the Quran's saying, don't they believe this? Then why won't they believe in us? Why won't they believe in this message? We already agree on that. And what we can see, the fact here in the ancient and Safiyic context, the very use of the verb khalaqa, to split, to divide, as the verb of creation, means that indeed the splitting myth, the division of primordial matter to create the universe, existed in the background of this text. And in fact, that's the way the verb meaning to split just becomes the verb meaning to create, right? It's a extension of that initial creative act, that splitting of primordial matter. So there's no creation ex nihilo. It is the dividing, portioning, splitting of eternal primordial matter, which is go further, the chaotic waters, right? Um, so then, if all of that is there, we see it in this text, we see the Quranic opponents responding to what the prophet is saying in such a way, then you realize that the prophet's theological intervention really did not concern cosmology. In fact, everyone was already on the same page, not because they were impacted or borrowing from the Hebrew Bible, but because the creation stories in the Hebrew Bible and in ancestral Arabian and in Mesopotamia, they have the same background. They are different threads, they're different lines of development from the same primordial stories, right? And so everyone was already on the same page as to where the universe came from. So if we imagine a situation that the Arab pagans, let's call them pagans, are confronted with the belief system of Jews, they will immediately recognize that they share much in common. And they will immediately syncretize their creator deity with the Jewish creator deity. And otherwise, and who is their creator deity? What's his name? His name is Allah in a pagan context. So what has previously, I think, been understood as massive impact and borrowing from the Hebrew Bible and from textual monotheistic traditions like Christianity and Judaism, that has been a way of explaining why the mushrik would sound this way, why they seem to share so much in common with Christian and Jewish beliefs. This Safiitic text here, which predates the Quran by 600 years, if not more, indicates actually, and there's no real evidence here that there's no reason at all to think that these people were impacted by textual monotheism. I mean, the same guy who wrote this text wrote pagan texts. His family were pagan. They were worshiping other gods. This is just their ancestral religion. But their ancestral Arabian religion has the same roots as ancestral Hebrew religion, Judaic religion, ancestral Canaanite religion. That develops, and its ultimate reflex is what we get in the Hebrew Bible. And the reason I said these two groups confront each other, they will immediately see that they're partaking in the same broader mythology. And there is all of the cosmology, and I think a lot of the common ground is already there. So the point of dispute, I think what the Quran is introducing to the Arab audience are things that they would not have inherited, things that would have been alien to them, like Moses, with the pagan Arabs, right? So for them, characters like Moses or Joseph or all of these biblical characters would have been alien for them. And indeed, those would be the things that they might reject. They would agree on the creation of the heavens and the earth. They agree on Allah being the creator. They agree on all of these things. But when it came to, certain, let's say, uh, 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 Israelite prophets, this would have been, I think, a point of contention. So the intervention there is actually getting these Arabian pagans to accept um, the Jewish patriarchs.
Hmm.
You know, you know,
I mean, so much of Quranic studies in the last few years has focused on sort of biblical and para-biblical instead
yeah,
of analytically, like you've said. So,
yeah.
what can these sorts of discoveries, how will they expand the lens of the field a little bit so that we're not just looking for those intertextualities solely when sort of analyzing the Quran and make us understand maybe religious syncretism in the region and how it developed across time?
Indeed. Thank you. Yes, I think, I mean, as a starting point, everything is syncretism,
Mhm.
right? Everything is syncretism. What is not? When people interact, they bring to that interaction their own ideas and those ideas shape the way they view others. I think Arabian pagans encountering Jews would immediately say, okay, um, Adonai, Elohim, whatever term that was being used in Arabia in the 7th century, that's clearly Allah. That's clearly the same God. And that wouldn't involve becoming Jewish. It wouldn't involve becoming Jewish sympathizing. It wouldn't involve anything like that. It would just involve looking at your own stories of creation and your own ideas about where the world comes from and hearing and seeing this, let's say, textual monotheistic version and seeing that they're quite similar. Say these are actually the same. And so I think when it comes to issues like that, there's much to be learned. In fact, let's put it another way. Former readings of lines like Quran 21:30 see that as being as the impact of Syriac Christianity or Hebrew Bible. And if you actually go through the Quran and identify everything that bears a similarity with something in the Hebrew Bible or Syriac Christianity or literature, if you look at and every time you have a similarity, you interpret that similarity to be a shallow borrowing in the prophet's lifetime or early or shortly before from those other traditions. What you end up realizing is or what you have to claim then is that the Arabs had no beliefs, no mythology, no religion. There was nothing to them. They had nothing. Everything they had was just taken over.
Mm.
And that's incredibly strange. But put it another way, the Arabs of the Hijaz are, uh, let's say, they're a late antique Near Eastern culture which descends from an ancient Near Eastern. Okay, we can put it very crudely in that way. Their ancestors would have partaken in the same, let's say, uh, mythological complex, would have told the same stories as other people in the ancient Near East, like in Canaan and Mesopotamia. What would have interrupted that? Why would they, in the 7th century, if they indeed remained pagans, and of course they are going to be influenced and they're going to be interacting with other groups, and that paganism does change, and it does change. The Arabs that the Prophet is interacting with in Mecca are not exactly like the Safavid guys, much has changed. But still, what would have interrupted the continuation of that belief system? Altered, changed, but not completely cut off. And I think what we're realizing now, and and this is an inheritance perhaps of the way academic disciplinary lines were drawn in the 19th century and earlier, is that Arabia was not part of the ancient Near East. Okay, it just wasn't. So when you studied the ancient Near East, you studied the ancient Levant, you studied Mesopotamia and Egypt, and that was a whole world with its mythologies, religious practices, and everything else. And Arabia was Islamic.
Mm.
Arabia was not part of the ancient Near East. But these texts are actually revealing to us that indeed Arabia was obviously Arabia, the closest region Arabia is to is Canaan, right? And Mesopotamia was part of the ancient Near East. And it is not surprising to see the continuity of ancient Near Eastern mythology into the Arabian context and even into late. In
So
fact, it
it's
would be
mind-boggling that Arabia for so long has not been seen as a part of the ancient Near East. I mean, even within the discussion of late antiquity, I was surprised to find out that, I mean, Arabs aren't the only people, but Arabia was only brought into the conversation of how it influenced that period or how that period influenced that region only
Mm,
fairly recently, even though
yeah.
it seems like not only with the inscriptions, and I know the study of inscriptions, especially Arabian inscriptions, have really like exploded within the last 30 years, to my recollection. But it seems like there's a long literary tradition of interactions with Arab peoples from either the Romans or the Greeks or but yeah, so it's just mind-boggling that only now we're starting to see Arabia as a part of the ancient Near East.
And I think that in many ways it's natural because when you the pre-Islamic Arabia is not well preserved in Islamic period sources. So before you had things like um, archaeology and epigraphy, what did you have to access pre-Islamic Arabia in a real way? You had passing references and outside sources
Mhm.
by Romans and Syrian authors and others,
Which have their
and
own set of problems in and of.
yes, yes, precisely, and you have late um, and people like to call them indigenous voices. They're not indigenous voices. These are, Abbasid era, oftentimes people of Persian background writing about pre-Islamic Arabia. Okay, and the whole baggage that comes with that as well. But they are not indigenous voices. They are not pre-Islamic voices about freedom. You know what
So
I
it
mean?
wasn't due to prejudice.
I think it's both. The prejudice in some ways arises from that. A lot of times, Arabia, again, when we say in terms of discipline, even now, when you look at the curriculum for the study of um, the Hebrew Bible, for example, if you want to study the world of the Hebrew Bible, ancient Arabia doesn't really figure into that in a serious way. Students of Hebrew Bible will only rarely learn Sabaic or Manaic or these ancient South Arabian languages, even though they're Iron Age cultures, Iron Age Semitic speaking cultures. So, and directly, I think that can shed a lot of light. Professor Seth Sanders is sort of, emphasizing the importance of the Arabian realm for as a point of comparison for the study of the Hebrew Bible and the world of the Bible as well. So it's changing, but ultimately, I think the initial intuition is that Arabia is Islamic studies, and that's a whole different thing than ancient Near East. Um, but I think the advances in our understand archaeology and epigraphy are changing that in a good way. Yeah,
That,
yeah,
then would you agree? I mean, I do want to talk about Oceania, and I don't
yeah,
want
yeah,
to move left or Oceania 2.
yeah.
I don't want to move too left. But do you think this period of study should, I mean, and we spoke about this with Professor Hughes, do you think are you in agreement with this period of study, maybe all the way up until the Abbasid Revolution, moving into maybe the study of the classics or should be the item of classicists, so to speak, seeing
Ye-
that we have a continuation of the late ancient world into the early Islamic period, and that, it settling itself within Islamic studies might be a disposition.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can approach it, and I think I've said this before previously on the former podcast. The study of pre-Islamic Arabia through, let's say, Abbasid sources and later is a matter of deception history. That's legitimate. That's a legitimate mode of inquiry, but that's very different than studying, Sabaic epigraphy, right? These are very, very different lines of inquiry. Um, and I think in the latter case, that is that field of study is better positioned in things like the ancient Near East and classics and so forth. Yes. The questions are also different because if you're talking about Seba, the kingdom of Seba, the way to understand the kingdom of Seba is through archaeology and epigraphy of South Arabia.
Right.
And that's the way to understand the kingdom, right? To reconstruct its history and so forth. To understand the Muslim receptive, the way Muslims understood Saba, they weren't using those sources at all. Later Muslims, right? So that's another, those sources don't necessarily help us understand how Muslims understood Saba. You see what I mean? It's a different, like you're not going to read epigraphy and then go and try to understand how it makes sense of what Muslims were saying about Saba. They're two different things.
I get it.
And that's totally fine, and both are completely legitimate, but they bear on the question. So, for example, if I want to understand the way the pre-Islamic Arabs understood Allah, um, for me, I think the Quran is a primary source, a primary witness to the very end of pre-Islamic Arabia, we could say. Um, but what later writers say about Allah is going to be informed by the Quran, but it's going to be informed by many other things that are not necessarily eyewitnesses to that environment. And we can understand the way Allah as a supreme deity in Jahili times was interpreted, understood, or constructed by later writers. Or we can use the epigraphy to try to understand how he was actually seen, actually worshipped by pre-Islamic Arabs. And sometimes there will be overlap. One of the things that's really exciting about this text, and this is my point of view, I'm not in the business of changing history for the purpose of changing history. I'm not in the business of disproving anything. I want to understand this material to whatever conclusion it leads. And this particular text is actually quite compatible with traditional understandings of how the pagans viewed Allah, the pagan Arabs viewed Allah, that he was indeed a creator deity that was venerated in ancient times, right? And that by his role as the creator. That's totally compatible. We don't change anything here. In fact, we say, well, that's actually quite compatible. It might be compatible because those who discussed Allah read the Quran closely. They did in Muslim period, and that's the way the Quran presents the pagan. See what I mean? So it's so that's the whole story. But then sometimes texts take us in a different direction. So even though Allah is the creator of the Safvidic context, He is. He's the creator deity in the Safvidic context. He is very, very infrequently invoked. You see what I mean? Very infrequently invoked. Can you hear me well? Is there a lot of noise in the background?
We can hear you.
Okay. So he's very infrequently invoked. And he was certainly not the most popular deity. In fact, that was Allah. She gets invoked more than everyone else. So by invocational frequency, we're talking about a relatively minor deity. In other words, Allah, although having created the universe or created things and does have this ability to find light into the face of death, was not the God that you called upon in most cases. And that situation changes. That situation changes. So in the Safvidic inscriptions, you see that once we get to the late pre-Islamic period, we get to the 6th century, the what we call Qubayl al-Islam, a little bit before Islam, all the other gods stop being called upon, and the inscriptions only a call upon Allah or Allah. So, see what I mean? So he becomes popular. He becomes the only deity that you invoke. The inscriptions, I say this again very clearly, the inscriptions are monotheistic. What does that mean? I don't think monotheism has any objective meaning. All right, it's a relative term. People may consider themselves monotheists. I would not be surprised if the Mushrikeen considered themselves monotheists. And others can consider them polytheists, right? You see this discourse happening all the time between sects.
Right.
What I mean by monotheistic when I say these inscriptions are monotheistic is that they only invoke one God. You see what I mean? The corpus is monotheistic. It contains invocations only to one God. It's not to say, based on that alone, that they are Christians or they're Jews or anything else. But what we can say is that in late antiquity, it's right before the rise of Islam, a religion, I've said this before, transformation, revolution, as you like, something happens where all the other gods fall to the side. And now we see it very clearly. The Arabs start to primarily invoke and worship the creator deity, their creator deity, who is Allah. And it probably reflects this trend in late antiquity, obviously surrounded by monotheism. We said everything is syncretism. Everyone around you is worshiping their creator deity, right? The Jews worship the creator, Christians worship the creator. Then you and your tradition, even though you had many gods, you direct your worship to the creator.
And contrary to Al-Azmai's, Azami's,
Al-Azmi, yeah, Al-Azmi, yeah.
yeah, idea about how it was the project of Muhammad that elevated Allah to this position of invocation. You seem to believe that this actually started prior to the
Mm,
mission of
mm.
Muhammad.
Yeah, so what I would say, I don't know if I believe anything. I don't, but when it comes to this interpretation of material, but what I would say is um the uh evidence that we have shows that the elevation, I wouldn't maybe let's not even say elevation, that the invocational frequency of Allah is not the product of Muhammad's ministry because it precedes him.
Mm.
It's there in the 6th century that Allah has become the primary object of worship. So it's not connected to Allah's role as creator. Allah can be a creator, a deity, but hold on, I just realized it. Stop staring. Okay, good.
You're not the
The whole
only
time.
person that does that during a
Yeah,
presentation. Just let
yeah,
the presentation stay up as we still talk.
yeah. But I mean, it's the talking that matters. So it isn't the fact that you acknowledge Allah as the creator, all right, that causes you to worship him primarily. No, because you can have a creator deity that you don't necessarily focus on. You might worship the rain deity, you might worship the war deity as you like. Something else happens that motivates the Arabs to say, okay, we've got these other gods, but we're going to worship Allah. Okay? And in doing so, it sort of realigns your understanding. Let's say recalibrates your understanding of the other super being. This is where the term super being matters because, there are other, super beings in the Safavidic pantheon. We can call them gods if you like. But in the Quranic context, the mushrikeen are calling them shuraka or shufa'a, right? The intercessors or what have you. They're still super beings. I don't know what they are. Rona calls them angels, other things. I don't know if a label is really, I don't know if we can precisely define them. I don't know whether one label is enough. I can't imagine that there is a structured institution that determines that all the Arabians must conceive of them in the same way.
Mm.
Who's determining that? What top-down structure is forcing these beliefs on everyone, right? It doesn't exist. So, but they are super beings, and in at least for the opponents of the Prophet Muhammad, his opponents are saying these are our intercessors, that they worship Allah and that these are the intercessors. And this type of alignment is not apparent from the more ancient stages in Safavidic conspiracy, right? There's nothing there to suggest that any of these other super beings are intercessors. They seem to function independently. There is no word for intercession. There's no prayer for intercession. These beings function independently. And so there is, you see, there is that change. That change for me, I think, very clearly is motivated by um, being in a world of the scriptural monotheisms that we know, right? And that's the syncretism. So ultimately, sort of to round up that bit, this inscription and overall the broader view of Arabian religion that's coming out of the study of these texts shows us that the ancestral Arabian religion already had so much in common with scriptural monotheism already in the cosmology and everything else, right? And that the creator deity Allah, but it was already ready to be easily syncretized with a Jewish and Christian creator. It was already there. All of that was there. It was already. Um, and I think that that's just very interesting, very, very, just absolutely fascinating, right?
No, for real. It makes the
Yeah,
world of
yeah,
pre-Islamic Arabia sound very
yeah,
exciting.
So you
yeah.
argue that the whole concept of intercession would have come perhaps from a biblical context
Uh,
in
I
terms of.
no, I mean I would be more careful. I would say um, the ancient Arabian inscriptions provide no evidence for intercession, and the deities seem to function on their own. There is no call to Allah to ask Allah to do something.
Mhm.
There is no call to any other deity to ask Allah to do anything. In fact, Allah is rarely invoked, but no one's asking the other deities or other super beings to go and do and transmit a prayer to Allah
Mhm.
or convince Allah to do something that just doesn't exist there. In fact, they call upon Ba'al Samin, the rain god, to rawh bimatar, send the wind with rains himself, not ask Allah to send the rains. So intercession does not seem to be a testing. It's not.
Mm.
Um, does it mean it's there or not there? I don't know. We don't see it. Um, what's clear later also is that in the Paleo-Arabic inscriptions, 6th century, the prayers are directly addressed to Allah. There's not a single prayer to any other super being. So maybe that suggests they were demoted to intercessor. And in an inscriptional context, you just pay to the main guy, main God. And you can do intercession, you can ask for intercession in other contexts, but you pray to the main deity. In fact, it's not too unexpected. Like if you look at Islamic epigraphy, we know that throughout the history of Muslims, the intercession of saints and other holy people was common, but that phenomenon is barely represented epigraphically. You see what I mean? Most of the inscriptions, when you have it, are formulaic prayers directed towards. You have early inscriptions that seek the intercession of the prophet, but that's of course a different story. But inscriptions mentioning the intercession of saints, I maybe they exist. I don't know, what's going on all over the place, but I have not in the thousands of Islamic period inscriptions that I've read through. I've not seen it. Um, which so it doesn't mean it's not there, but it tells you something about the hierarchy of power. And using that same idea, when we look in the pre-Islamic inscriptions, it tells you something about the hierarchy of power. The deities for the Safavid guys were able to function independently. You see what I mean?
Mhm.
They were able to function. Yeah.
And would this process of demotion and hierarchy sort of also explain how certain deities became relations of Allah, like daughters, etc., rather than deities within their own right?
So I think you can have divine families. That's totally fine. One of the things that's really interesting is that for the Safavidic guys, Allat, and Allat is a title, huh? It just means the goddess.
Mhm.
And is a title of what we have in the earlier inscriptions, pre-Safavidic, Attab Samai, so Ishtar of the sky. It's a title of Venus.
Mhm.
But her father in the North Arabian tradition was not directly Allah. but it was Rudal, the god called Rudal. And this Rudal seems to be, I guess, the moon. I've hypothesized that I've written an article on this, perhaps it will. So the family relationship is not the same. Allat is not the daughter directly. Okay. Allat is yeah, but still there are families. There are families, family relations. And so Allah, I mean, if we so does Allah have children? Well, it seems so, because let's come back to the term of what Allah itself means. So Allah is very clearly a name that's used throughout these inscriptions, a proper name. It is a proper name of a deity, Allah. But what does it mean? So Allah, the most common etymology, even in the Islamic tradition too, is that it is a combination of al and a abbreviated form of the word ilah, where the first syllable has been dropped. So you get the God, and then it becomes basically the God as one word and no longer parsable. But it means originally the God. Now, the God or ilah, I mean, if the way I would translate ilah is neutrally as celestial super being. Okay? So super being that lives in the heavens or somewhere far away, distant. Okay, that so it means the celestial super being. And then in English we would say the, and we would capitalize the. Okay, and what is that? That's a title. That's a title. That's not a name. That's a title. The same way Allat, which means the female celestial super being, par excellence, is a title. It's only that, a title, and it refers to Ishtar. But one of the interesting things about titles is that over time, titles will overtake the actual name. So Haftar Samai, so Ishtar of the sky, in the first millennium BCE, in Talmudic B inscriptions, there is no trace of her in Safiyat. That name is completely gone, and replaced by the title, the goddess. So that if you asked a Safavidic guy, in my opinion, about Attar Samay, they would have no idea. But they would know Allat, and they would both point to Venus. They would say that's Allat, that's Attar Samay, that a name had been forgotten and replaced by the title. I think the same story is true of Allah. Let me tell you why. Allah is the creator deity, creates through splitting, grants light, all of this business. This mythological profile is compatible with the ancient West Semitic or ancient Semitic in general creator deity, Ilu, Ilu. I'm not sure whether it's a diptote or not yet, but that doesn't matter. Ilu. Okay, we'll say that. Ilu, it just means, well, the name of the creator deity, but also the father deity. Sires, he has all these children, these subordinate super beings that are his children. They may not be weaker than him necessarily, but they're his children. Remember, these deities are very much like humans, and the son is not necessarily weaker than the father. You see, I mean, we tend to think, oh, if he's the father, then he's stronger than all the. No, it's a very complex political situation. In any case, he is the father deity. Now, what's interesting is that Ilu, you'll find Il, this element, very common in ancient Arabic. But by, let's say, the second or third century AD, and especially in the Nabatean realm, in the western part of Arabia, this Il, meaning God, disappeared. And the Il is substituted with Allah. So you have names like Wahab Il. Arabic name means Il has given. And then later you get names like Wahab Allah. Allah has given. So and we see that Allah is the creator deity, splitting deity, all this, which is compatible with ancient Il. So what's the relationship between the two? I would suggest the relationship between the two is the exact relationship between Allat and Aftar, right? Venus, Ishtar. It's where the title, the epithet, the honorific epithet overtakes the original name, such the original name is forgotten. Il being the original name of the celestial, the creator deity, creator God, was called by the epithet the God, Al Ilah, the God par excellence, like Allat. Over time, Allah, al-Ilah contracts to Allah and just simply becomes a name, and the epithet overtakes the original name, such that Il is completely forgotten as a proper name in Arabic, and all you're left with is Allah. So Allah just simply means is a title of ancient Eid.
What you're saying sounds like it gives credence to what I hear often polemically, that Allah is just a translation of the Western Semitic creator god El or Il,
Yes, but it's not a translation. That's the point. You don't how would you translate the name? It's not a translation.
right? Because
It is yeah, it's a
that
title.
article kind of creates a bit of
Yeah, it's a title. It's a title. So for example, um uh uh uh, Tehran, let's think of a nickname for you, right? We'll call you the man. All right? The man. Like this is the man. And then we call you that so much that everyone just knows you as the man that your name Tehran has been completely forgotten.
Hmm.
And that you just get known as the man. So the man is not a translation of Tehran. It's a title that, because of usage and popularity, has overtaken your original name and caused your original name to be forgotten. The same way as Allat, the goddess, has overtaken Astar. There's no more Astar in North Arabia. She's only the goddess. Il has been, the name Ilu, has been forgotten, replaced by the title, the God. You see what I mean? The celestial super being, an appropriate title for the creator or the measurer, the splitter of the cosmos. Yeah,
All right. And I mean, oh man, that just leads to many more questions. I mean, I hope
there are many.
in
Yeah.
the future someone might come out with an article who was Muhammad before Islam, because I know some people are debating on if Muhammad was a title that eventually became what he was known by, or did he go by anything else before Islam?
I
You
mean,
know, yeah, please, Roxanne.
no, no, it just reminds me a lot about the debates about how the title the Messiah is used in reference to Jesus in the Quran, that it
Hmm.
becomes a title within itself without the same theological weight or implication
Yeah,
as in other texts.
absolutely.
It
Yeah.
becomes an epithet. And then eventually, if we were to argue, there could be a possibility that epithet overcomes the other names and becomes a central name for that particular character.
Yes, yes, absolutely. You're right, and I think that that's the background of what we're dealing with here, right? So it is really ultimately ancient ancestral Arabian Allah is simply the continuation, the West Semitic created deity. And Arab pagans, when confronted with scriptural monotheism as presented by Jews or Christians, which those traditions themselves are continuations of ancient West Semitic mythology. I mean, they all have the same root. The end products, they're both evolving independently, you could say, but the end products are comparable. And you're going to see similarities because they have the same roots. And you can compare it to language relatedness. It is not by accident that Hebrew and Arabic share many words in common because they derive from the same root. It is not by accident that ancestral Arabian religion and Judaism will have many things in common because they descend from the same, let's say, original stock of stories, mythology. This does not concern patriarchs. This does not concern stories about Joseph or Moses. I'm talking about the bigger story, the of creation and cosmology and so forth. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and I feel like, I mean, I'll move to the Oceania question, but just to add,
sure.
I feel like we're actually moving to a more sophisticated understanding um, of how religions develop. I mean, specifically within the context of Islam, because Islam is always
Mhm.
charged with just simply taking from what was in the region, as in a one-to-one, almost as to give a example, like the old evolution chart of ape to man. Even though we now know things were, if you believe in evolution, but just going by the charts, we know that according to those studies, things are a little bit more complicated than that. But yeah, if you wanted to add anything to that,
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the questions that I'm working on now that I think is quite interesting um, is and I'll give a paper on this summer at some. I need to work on that. In fact, is what is the what about Ishmael and Abraham? Okay, when did Ishmael and Abraham come to be regarded as patriarchs of the Arabs? Was this a what degree or how old was this belief among Arabic speaking or Arabian communities? And of course, we shouldn't take them as a whole. Ishmael's story could be different.
Right.
It's quite complicated. One of the things that we can say, just to begin with, sneak peek in this, but again, we don't want to just say everything is just ported over, but maybe it is. We don't know. We have to investigate. One of the things that we could say that's quite interesting is that Yisma'el, this is the Arabic, the original Arabic pronunciation. Now, Ismail has a different story, but Yisma'el, this is what you'll get in many inscriptions, is a common Arabian name stretching from Yemen to Syria in pre-Islamic times. Ismail is everywhere. This is a very common Arab. Well, okay, it's widespread. It's common enough. It's quite common and widespread. In contexts where we cannot argue for the impact of, the Hebrew Bible or scriptural monotheisms. Okay, this stuff is really much older than that, oftentimes, than any plausible, let's say, heavy drag. But the name or any reflex of the name Ibrahim, Abraham, or any of this is completely unknown.
So you're saying that it's more, because I know some of the theories that are put out there is that the Arabs only became aware of their Ishmaelite ancestry because of their engagement with Christians in the Fertile Crescent or the Levant going into the Arabian desert.
Or earlier than that, their engagement with Jewish communities.
Jewish
example, like Josephus already makes that connection, right? So that could be something. But then, where the next question could be, where did Jewish ideas of Arabian descent from Ishmael come from?
Right.
Is it really just a Jewish idea, or is it or is it somehow anchored in an older Arabian tradition? I don't know. But what I do know is that Abraham is completely absent. There is no reflex of the name Ibrahim or Abraham anywhere in Arabia. While there is abundance for Ishmael, and interestingly as well, Hajar as a female name is also quite well attested. So you have Abraham and Hajar as names, just names, not saying that these tell us the belief in any kind of in the Abraham saga. I'm not saying these names tell us that these pagan Arabs believed in the Abraham saga. Okay, I'm just saying these names are used in their existence, which is significant when we consider that the name Abraham is completely accurate.
And are they pre-4th century?
Yes.
Pre-Josephus?
Yes.
Okay, wow.
Okay. So yes, these are ancient. So that's fascinating because it already shows that Abraham and Ishmael did not come in as a package, right? These are two actual independent, different moving parts. Okay. Now and of course after Islam, Abraham is everywhere. People are naming their kids Ibrahim all over the place,
right?
Which even further underscores the significance of its absence in pre-Islamic times. But Ismail or Yismael, I should say, and also you have later Ismail is there as well. So like you said, it's obviously complicated and complex. Yes, and we have much to do to treat this problem here because it isn't as simple as saying I see a similarity between A and B. A is textually older than B. Therefore, B comes from A, right? That's a simplifying methodology, and in the absence of anything else, that might work. But now we have so much more to work with. In fact, we see that traditional way of looking at the relation between stories that are in common between the Arab tradition and the scriptural monotheistic tradition, that commonality may very well be the very simplified importation. In many cases, that's the true. But in some cases, like we saw with Allah and his role, and perhaps with this Ishmael thing as well, it could be much more complex. Yeah, it could be much more complex. It still could be borrowing, but it could be very ancient borrowing, and there's so much to do, right? And I don't have an answer to that yet. I don't have one yet, but it's something that I'm busy with at the moment.
All right, so let's talk about Oceania 2.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so the online corpus of the inscriptions of ancient North Arabia. Can you tell us a little about how that project came about? Number one,
Yeah,
just for people who aren't familiar with it, and the
yeah.
number two is, well, as well as number one, helping researchers and the wider public engage with the linguistic and cultural history of the region.
Look, so yes, this is incredibly important because this entire conversation we're having now that we've had now um, is inconceivable. Was inconceivable, let's say 20 years ago. Right? The kind of data we have available to us now, the stuff that we can say, the methodologies, our ability to read these texts, understand them, and use them as sources of history. The field is unrecognizable. If you look at the methodologies from the 80s, 90s, I mean, there's no, we're in a different world. And the reason for that is the fact that we spend so much time out uh, surveying, exploring, discovering all this material, right? The reason we have this now to do is because of that effort. I just got back from a long survey, and in 2 weeks, I'll be gone for a month on another survey. This is what generates data. This is exploration. It generates data. This is what allows us to move the conversation forward. But how does that data reach the public? Well, it's through articles, but it's not all, we can't publish all in articles. What we have now, and this was the project founded by Michael McDonald in the mid 90s. He designed something that was happening in the turn of the computer age is to digitize all of this data and make it publicly available. So he started in the mid 90s the Safavidic database online, which was going to be a FileMaker database to put all of the Safavidic inscriptions on the internet so that researchers could easily access them, but not only access them, but compare them and do large scale comparisons. About 10 years ago, is it now? Yes. McDonald and at the Khalili Research Center with Professor Jeremy Johns obtained a British research account, one of these British government grants to develop the Safavidic database and turned it into Oceana. And that was Oceana 1. But the money ran out before the project was finished, which meant that the Oceana that was available for years online was incomplete, partially edited, impossible really to cite because you had no idea where much of that information even came from. It was sort of this, but there was no money to do anything. And so a couple of,
Yeah, I was actually a little sad to find that out because I
yeah,
only became aware of Oceana maybe 2019,
yeah,
2020. And to read
yeah,
that at the time, I finally had a chance to engage
yeah.
with it. The money had stopped,
Oh yeah,
stopped
yeah,
being, additions, but even then,
yeah.
it was still extremely beneficial for someone
It
just
is.
trying to scratch the surface of the field of inscriptions.
Well, yeah, it's beneficial in the sense that it kind of exposes you to them, but it's a double-edged sword. Oceana 1 was only usable by experts because everything had to be scrutinized. And there's a great danger, and I had this situation. I've dealt with people who have tried to use that material, that data, for more general purposes who could not evaluate it on their own, and it was quite problematic. So it was not ready to be. The money ran out, but it was not ready. But luckily, we got more funding now, indefinite funding, we should say, to continue to improve Oceana. We moved it to OSU, where it is now Oceana 2. And I mean, it's updated live every day almost. There's new material. The older records are being changed. Now, we are limited by resources. We need a team of people really to fix it, but it's happening slowly. And new materials going on. We're expanding it. We're going to have a dump of another 1,500 inscriptions, fully edited in a good way. They're going to dump all at once soon. So it's continued to grow, and it's been improved in many ways to make it a true research tool. And this is the way to make this material publicly available. Like this Allah inscription we just got to done discussing. It's an article, but I'm going to put it in Oceana. So it'll be there in a kind of very brief, presentable form that anyone can access. This is a gateway to pre-Islamic Arabia stops being this um, weird, let's say, obscure, dusty field that can only be accessed once you read Arabic sources, medieval Arabic sources. But in fact, I think it shifts our understanding of pre-Islamic Arabia to material evidence, archaeology, and makes that material usable by non-experts. It turns it into a source of history. So it's a tremendous tool. I encourage your viewers to visit it, to play around with it. They can send emails with queries and so forth. It's a huge database now. Just to give you some idea, we have about 50,000 records in there. Over the last 10 years of field work, there is we've obtained a corpus of 450,000 photographs. 450,000 photographs, let's say divided roughly by 4. We are dealing with more than 100,000 new inscriptions that have not been studied, that have not been published online, and we need labor for it. But that's just to show you what's there. And that's the tip of the iceberg. Absolutely is. So much to do, and much to learn. Some of the questions that you've asked today that I could not answer will become, in my opinion, I have much confidence in this, will become answerable in the near future.
I mean, you answered a lot of the questions that we had before we had a chance to even ask them. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
How do you hope OCEANA is going to continue to grow and develop? Like, do you have any ideas about specific features that you would like to enhance or which enable like more sort of the lay public or non-specialists to be able to access it and use it?
So we are right now, Oceana is going to deploy a very advanced, let's say, dictionary function. So once we get everything edited and so forth, we'll be able to have a digital dictionary where you can click on any word, you'll get the commentary, but you also see all occurrences of it and all the scripts, and it's live and updatable. We have another function in development which will allow you to do easy maps. So let's say here we're talking about the name Ismail, and you want to see on a map everywhere it occurs. So you can search the name and then plot to map, and it'll plot all the inscriptions for you on a map so you can see everywhere it is. You could also do, for example, other things. You say, I want to see everywhere Allah is worshipped. I want to see everywhere this tribe is. I want to see where all inscriptions that mentioning pasturing, where are they located? And it will just spell it out for you. All right. So but these features are still dependent upon good data. It's the mapping is dependent on good GIS data. And that is not to be taken for granted at this point. There's a lot of problems. So we're fixing that. The dictionary is only as good as our understanding of the lexicon. So we work on that. But these are the sort of functions that will be available. And of course, we have robust commentaries and sources and everything else. The bibliography is very powerful, so you can do all kinds of things with it. Yeah, yeah.
And Mr. Michael McDonald and Leila Neme are still a part of the project.
Michael McDonald is the scientific director along with me. So Michael is, as we say, Sheikhna. He's our Sheikh, a beloved friend, and so he's of course plays an important role. Leila Neme, of course, has her own. Is managing her own database called DecoNab, which is the Nabatean and developing Arabic inscriptions. But Leila does advise, and if she has anything to say, of course, we take it, and of course we all help each other. I mean, I help her. I inserted just now one type. I'll do more into DecoNab as well to her database, and so we all kind of cooperate together. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, because Nabateans is another aspect of Arabian history that I would like to get into. I know it falls outside of the scope of late antiquity, which is in my main interest as of late, but still the Nabateans I find to be extremely fascinating. I mean, looking at their architecture, their syncretism of Arabian and Hellenistic culture. There's a lot there that I haven't had a chance to read about.
Tremendously important. Tremendously.
And so, Ahmed, Professor Al-Jallad, thank you for your time. We do have one question for you left, unless there's anything else that you would like to add. uncovered text, rewritten timelines, and helped build and improve upon databases. But I imagine there are still things that keep you researching, as you've mentioned some of them. If you had to name one big unanswered question that's still driving your work, what would it be?
Oh man, there's too many such questions. Too many. But one of the things that I'm doing now, that I just got back from, um, and I'll be continuing doing, this is going to advance us in a huge way, I think. Whenever you open up a map, we talked a little bit about this before your show. When you open up a map, history book, shows you a map of Arabia with all the trade routes. You see these beautiful lines that take you from point A to point B, you know, beautiful trade routes. How do you know they work? I mean, movement through these landscapes is very difficult. It's not a matter of just drawing a line on a map. It's very complicated. And that connects with how people interact, what cities are important, which ones aren't, and so many strong assertions about what's of significance and what is not of significance comes from whether or not it is on a trade route. And whether or not it's on a trade route is dependent on those trade routes actually working. How do you know they work? The only way to work is to test them. And so I just came back from a big mission where I tested a very long distance trade route.
Mm.
I won't reveal where or what, but I tested a very long distance trade route. And the results are is it doesn't really work so well.
Mm.
And to make it work makes it very, very inefficient. And this will have a cascading. I'm going to test another one. And we're going to find it, but they have to be the only way really to do this is to be on the ground and to do the work and to test it to go. And so that's what I'm in the business. I mean, I'm in the business. I try to be busy with many things, but that's one new kind of approach that aside from surveying for inscriptions, part of testing trade route comes with finding inscriptions, because inscriptions are sort of a trail. But it's very different than the Harra with Safed guys, where these guys are local, they live there, and we're basically studying their culture and they're in their territory. The search for inscriptions on a trade route is something different. And you can. I did this with a explorer friend, and he was starting to despair for 2 days because we found almost nothing. One day, 24-hour period, we found one text, but that's important. That's so important. It tells you the route isn't working. It's not that, you see what I mean? It's
Yeah.
tremendously important. And whether we shift or we change, and now we start to find inscriptions. And anyway, you see, this is the text and the inscriptions. And when you're in this kind of business, it's a very different significance. The inscription does not have to say anything to be significant. It can just be someone's name. But that name tells you, and the writing system tells you where they're from, where they came from, perhaps maybe where they're going, when they were there. So it doesn't have to have rich information like in the Safvidic text with mythology and Allah and graves and this business. It just needs to be a name, but the name itself, that's just gold. That's gold by itself, right? So it's a very, very fun thing. So I'll be busy with that and check back in maybe in a couple of years because that's what it's going to take. We'll have some real answers, real data. Yeah,
Fortunately, time flies, so I'm pretty sure it'll come around real quick. And
yeah, it absolutely
we
does.
can talk
It
about it
absolutely
on
does.
this channel. So.
Would be my pleasure, friend. Yeah.
All right. Well, look, thank you for your time. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. Your work is extremely fascinating. Obviously, your article has created a bit of waves on social media. A lot of people has been sharing and talking about it. I'm really happy that you had a chance to get into the more technical aspects of your research.
Mm.
I would have hated to just only talk about the beginning and the end, which probably appeals to most people who aren't too familiar with the technical aspects. But
Mm.
what you broke down with the presentation you gave, I mean, really clarified a lot of things for myself and I believe for our audience. So if there's anything else you'd like to add, the stage is yours. But if not, really thank you for your time and we greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.